Theories of Creation, Talk 12. This talk discusses the theory that creation was revealed in 6 days. This view was put forward by P.J. Wiseman in Creation Revealed in 6 Days in 1946. It's different from the other theories in that its main aim is not to harmonise the early chapters of Genesis with any particular scientific theory, but rather to examine them from a literary point of view. He states that his central aim is to find out how the account of creation came into existence, not how the universe came to be. As a result, his interpretation of Genesis 1 is derived from an understanding of ancient literature. So first of all, the antiquity of Genesis. First, he discusses several reasons as to why Genesis 1:1 to 2:4 should be considered as being extremely ancient. In summary, these include, firstly, it does not contain any reference whatever to any event subsequent to the creation of the first man and woman and what God said to them. Secondly, all its references are universal in their application and scope, and no mention is made of any particular tribe or country or customs. Thirdly, the names for the sun and moon do not appear, but they are simply called the greater and lesser lights. Fourthly, it contains the plural us in Genesis 1, verse 26, which no later writer would have ever dared to use. And fifthly, it uses the word seventh instead of Sabbath in Genesis 2, 2 and 3. Further, based on much detailed and technical archaeological evidence, he shows that rather than the Genesis narrative being derived from the ancient Babylonian creation tablets, the truth is that the Babylonian creation tablets were more probably based on the original Genesis tablets. He states this: "We have already noticed that references found in the Babylonian creation tablets were once thought to be the source from which the Genesis narrative had been derived. Now it can be seen clearly that the Babylonian stories had little in common with Genesis, except that literary methods of writing and transmission in early days were probably similar." He points out that the Babylonian epic of creation was written in 6 books or tablets. Also, it's been traced as far back as the days of Abraham that the Babylonians always recorded the creation series on 6 tablets. It's this fact alone in which the Genesis and Babylonian accounts are similar. Genesis 1 is divided into 6 days numbered 1 to 6. And the Babylonian accounts of creation are almost invariably written on 6 tablets. The question then arises as to why this should be. Why 6 tablets? An old Babylonian account says that for 6 days he, Oannes, instructed Allorus. According to the story, Allorus was the first man who reigned, and when the sun went down he withdrew until next morning. Oannes was stated to be the original instructor of mankind in this legend and was a Babylonian god. The Babylonians did not believe in a 6-day creation, but rather believed that there was an occasion on which 6 days instruction was given to man. This being stayed with man during the day and taught him the knowledge of writing and numbers and arts of all kinds. He explained everything necessary for civilized life, and at sunset he went back to the sea. Further parallels to this legend can be found in ancient Egyptian traditions, where Thoth, an Egyptian god, was believed to have taught mankind to write. P.J. Wiseman states, as far back as it's possible to go in Egyptian history, to the first dynasty, we find a perfected system of writing. In addition, he states, it's clear that in Old Testament times the current belief was of a revelation to first man and to Enoch and of heavenly tablets. Constant reference is made to God, teaching man to write. He cites such references as those appearing in the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, written before the Christian era, and another book written called I Enoch, 1 Enoch, written in the 2nd century before Christ. The deduction made from the existence of many such legends and traditions is that they must all have been based upon an original, the most ancient of all. Could they, in fact, be derived from God speaking to Adam at the dawn of history? Did God himself write the first 6 stone tablets on which was recorded a brief summary of his instruction of Adam? P.J. Wiseman says of Genesis 1:1 to 2:4, "It is God teaching Adam in a simple yet faultless way how the earth and the things which he could see on and around him had been created. The Lord God talked with Adam in the garden. This tablet purports to be a simple record of what God said and did. We would claim then that this first section of Genesis is the most ancient piece of writing. It's a record of what God told Adam. It's not an impersonal general account. It's God teaching the first man the elemental things about the universe at the very dawn of human language. He also makes it clear that this is not a vision, as there's no wording such as I saw, or I beheld, or I heard to indicate this. Instead, 10 times the account has God said, implying that he was talking to someone. This recalls a similarity to the 10 words, as the 10 Commandments are called by the Hebrews. Just as God originally wrote the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets of stone, did he also write of creation on 6 tablets? Could this be the reason why the Babylonians always recorded their creation series on 6 tablets? And then we'll look at the authorship of the first series of tablets. All scholars are agreed that the most significant and distinguishing phrase throughout Genesis is, "This is the account of." This is repeated 11 times in the book of Genesis and gives Genesis a distinctive framework. The first of these 11 occurrences is in Genesis 2:4, which says, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth." This verse completes the first creation narrative and is part of what is called a colophon. A colophon was a note added at the end of an account which gave particulars of the title, the date, the author or the owner, and other details of the contents of the tablet, manuscript or book. Again, most scholars recognise that Genesis 2, verses 1 to 4, is a colophon, or an appendix to the first creation narrative. P.J. Wiseman then suggests that in these verses we find the following. First of all, the title, the heavens and the earth. That's in Genesis 2:4. And then the date, in the day that the Lord did, Asa, the earth and the heavens, Genesis 2:4. It was written on a series of tablets numbered 1 to 6, completed in all their vast array, says Genesis 2:1. Wiseman's interpretation is the tablets arranged in order. It also states that after the 6th tablet, the writing was finished, completed, Genesis 2:1. And the only name appearing on the colophon is the name of the Lord God. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he'd been doing, Genesis 2:2. Wiseman's interpretation, God had finished compiling the 6 tablets. Could this possibly indicate that God was the author? There's therefore a small amount of evidence indicating that God may have been literally the original author of the very first page of our Bible. And what about the authorship of the remaining 10 series of tablets? The remaining series of tablets in Genesis are shown in the information given below the screen. And the first tablet finishes with Genesis 5:1. This is the written account of Adam's line. The second tablet, Genesis 6:9. This is the account of Noah. The third tablet in Genesis 10:1. This is the account of Shem, Ham and Japheth. The fourth tablet in Genesis 11:10. This is the account of Shem. The fifth tablet, Genesis 11:27. This is the account of Terah. The sixth tablet, Genesis 25:12. This is the account of Ishmael. The seventh tablet, Genesis 25:19. This is the account of Isaac. The eighth tablet, Genesis 36:1. This is the account of Esau. The ninth tablet, Genesis 36:9. This is the account of Esau. And the 10th tablet, Genesis 37:2. This is the account of Jacob. P.J. Wiseman considers that each time this phrase occurs, it finishes the section, rather than heads up the following one. Just as in Genesis 2:4, the words, "This is the account of the heavens and the earth," finishes the first section. Thus Adam would have written Genesis 2:5 to 5:1 on a series of tablets. Noah would have written Genesis 5:2 to 6:9, and so on. And perhaps Joseph wrote the account from Genesis 37:3 onwards, but the text does not indicate whether he did or not. Subsequently, if Moses had access to these ancient tablets of Genesis, then he could well have been the one who compiled these all into one book. This understanding of the framework of Genesis means that far from being oral traditions passed down by word of mouth for hundreds of years, and finally being written down from memory maybe over 1,000 years after the events had taken place, instead it's composed of eyewitness accounts of events which were accurately recorded on tablets at the time and preserved over the centuries. All of the events falling into each section were personally known and observed by each of the authors listed, and each one ends with the statement, "This is the account of," and then the author. Also, each section ceases before the death of the author is recorded, leaving that event to be recorded by the following author, which makes a lot of sense. If this deduction as the origin of the book of Genesis is correct, then it explains why there are two creation narratives. The first was written by God as a record of his instructing Adam, and the second was written by Adam and was the account of the beginning of his life. And then the structure of Genesis 1:1 to 2:4. Returning then to the first creation narrative, it is clear that it's divided into 6 sections and that each is separated from the next by the phrase, "And there was evening and there was morning, the first day," and so on. If it did originally comprise 6 tablets, then each was clearly marked in numerical order, day 1, day 2, and so on. And further, it can be seen that the 6 days fall into 2 clearly parallel parts, the events recorded in the last 3 days being parallel with the first 3. These parallels are summarised by Wiseman as shown in the information given below the screen. So we have day 1 with the light, and day 4 with the lights, sun, moon and stars. Day 2 we have water and atmosphere, and on day 5 we have fish in the water and birds in the air. And day 3 we have land and green vegetation, and on day 6 we have animals and man on the land, and the vegetation for them to eat. The key to the arrangement is in the words, "The earth was formless and empty." In the first 3 days, God told of the formation of the heaven and the earth, while in the second 3 days he told of the filling of the emptiness. The formlessness took shape or form in the narration of the first 3 days, and the void became occupied and inhabited in the second 3 days narrative. So on day 1 it was revealed how light came into existence, and on day 4 the sources and the purposes of that light were revealed. On day 2 God explained how the atmosphere came to be and how it separated the waters, and then on day 5 he explained how the atmosphere and the water were filled with birds and fish. And on day 3 God told how the dry land and the vegetation came to be, and on day 6 that the land was populated with animals and man, and how the vegetation was to be used for food. When it's understood that what God was doing throughout these 6 days was telling Adam about creation, then it's clear there's no longer any problem in understanding why the sun, moon and stars are talked about on day 4 when light is talked about on day 1. The narrative merely gives the order of revelation to Adam, not the order of creation itself. And God chose to reveal his creation to Adam in a logical and orderly form of parallelism, as already explained. Having considered both the literary form of Genesis in general and the structure of Genesis 1:1 to 2:4 in particular, certain features of the creation narrative then naturally follows. Each day begins with, "And God said." Well, this is logical if it's understood that God was speaking to Adam about creation. If man were not there to hear, then either God was speaking to himself or this phrase has to be understood figuratively. Each day ends with the phrase, "And there was evening, and there was morning." Adam would have needed to rest each night, which may explain why this time period is mentioned. God needs no rest, and is not governed by day and night, and therefore for him to cease activity at the end of each day is otherwise difficult to explain. When God had finished telling Adam about creation after 6 days, he rested from all his work. It's often pointed out that this means he ceased from his work. Wiseman suggests that God ceased from instructing Adam after 6 days because it was Adam who needed to rest. In addition, God gave things names throughout the creation narrative. He called the light day and the darkness night. He called the expanse sky and the dry ground land and the waters seas. Such names were not necessary for God, but they were necessary for man. If God was talking to Adam, it would have been necessary for him to call things by name. Lastly, it may be asked why God would talk to Adam about creation. Maybe it was in answer to Adam's first thoughts after he was created. Maybe he asked something along the lines of, "Where did I come from?" and "Why am I here?" In these 6 days of instruction, God answered man's most fundamental questions and gave him the answer to something he could not possibly have discovered for himself. Is it possible that God would have created man in his own image and then not explain to him where he came from and why he was there? So it seems that throughout this Genesis narrative, there's plenty of hints and clues that Adam was around. This seems to be a good explanation for the obviously anthropomorphic nature of the entire passage. And then Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11. Finally, it's important to see how this interpretation of Genesis 1:1 to 2:4 fits in with the fourth commandment as given in Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20, verse 11 says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day